get it open, please?
The infestation's got that box grip tight. Blast that sucker. Now, maybe we can find another way to break it free. What's connected to it?
I have detected these tumors are maintaining a grip on the cache. You'll need to burst them.
And you know, there is a very likely scenario. I'm not there's a very likely situation that and suddenly it becomes one of the biggest movies. But I think Technique's idea of a social experiment makes a lot of sense to me. Because at the end of the day, Technique taught us to actually see how you expect to assets. And that, you know, when people compare
well, that was unpleasant. Still, you've done enough to make the main tumor vulnerable now.
Oh, I'm not gonna fucking do this mission with this guy. It's not all, yeah.
Luscious and perfectly preserved. Very nice. No phone detected. Predator. Large. Lloyd, help them deal with it.
Finding the parts necessary to make a bait should not be too hard. Now, if you invested and look for parts.
Okay.
This will draw more investment. Dispatch them while they are close to the vessel in order to complete the bait. The desired target is approaching. Eliminate it to fulfill mission parameters. Target is down. They must just fractionally improve its odds of survival.
You slaughtered both of them. So exciting. The organ designed you well.
He starts mentioning copy of the scammer, where he makes his videos, getting way more dislikes than he gets likes, so...
Listen up, Tenno. We will not be making more Lloyd stew today. We are going after some sweet fungal polyps. And not a word to Mother. This guy will sniff out the polyps. Just make sure nothing else eats him first. He's oblivious. So, keep him safe and quiet. Mother can't know.
Let's go look at that. Tokens. Well, if you go all the way to the very end, you guys can see that right around over here. Well, it's not number one, but you know it might get there. You know, if there's more effort being done, it's got a few spaces to crawl up. But I think
that's what we're after. E11, dig it out.
What?
These babies put the fun back in Fungus. You'll keep this just between us, right?
So I'm doing an escort mission.
Easy prey, protect him!
Risk for buying, selling,
On to the next one.
and in both cases, it's promised to pay $1 million to $1 million. So no aspect is so I see. Yeah, I think you're kind of forgetting that there's inadvertently there's a bit of a lie in that situation. I will
of my own money into this to get us started, but this coin can't skyrocket. I can no longer
He's got the scent. Help him dig. Keep him alive!
You ain't getting no next famous more famous today.
One more call-up should do it.
Oh, Juggernaut's cute.
I don't know. I don't get it. At some point, you just have to ask yourself.
Kind of. Have a good night.
I'll stay up too late.
Oh, no promises. You already know me. I'll call here in a bit. If not, I'll be grinding. Love that guy.
He's found one. Quick, take it out. He's had enough already. Out. Harvest time. Alright. We got our pellets nice and fermented. Grab them. You're a genius. An artisan. A culinary master. A fine harvest of polyps. Fermented
This video is over 2 hours long because it looks at 4
in a
different
Juggernaut
games and
digestive
breaks into each section, so the video can be watched in pieces. Each section is about 15 minutes. The reason I spend so much time looking at each game is because this is meant to function as both a critical analysis and a watchable plot synopsis, meaning that even if you've never played these games, I speak in depth enough about the gameplay and story that you should be able to understand everything. You should have a good grasp on what these games are all about after watching this video, which also means I'll be spoiling everything about them. The Uncharted games are a series of PlayStation exclusives that were developed by Naughty Dog. The first was Drake's Fortune that released in 2007, then Among Thieves in 2009, followed by Drake's Deception in 2011. All of them for the PlayStation 3. The fourth game in the series just came out, Thief's End for PlayStation 4. You should also know that there was another game, Golden Abyss, that released for the PlayStation Vita. I haven't played that game, so I won't be discussing it, but I thought it was worth mentioning. I believe it's a prequel that's set before Drake's Fortune. The Last of Us was also made by Naughty Dog and came out in 2013. Although it's not part of the Uncharted series, it can be seen as something of a spiritual sequel. By that I mean both games are third-person shooters with cover mechanics and share a lot of features. From each other by some relatively small tweaks. We'll be taking a thorough look at this game at the end of this video.
I can fucking read.
out, and it was so
Now I can cook weenies. I wanna fucking cook a weenie.
shortest of them all. It also has the least amount of variety in its gameplay and setting, and also resembles a lot of its content. First, however, let's look at the story. Even though it's the strongest part of the game, it has its own messy issues, parts of it make absolutely no sense, and there are long stretches of time that very little happens. It's still strong, however, because it's carried by its characters.
Fight it. Just how much trouble could one girl be? Well, come on.
Feel the fast clothings, imagine the smooth transition from a coffin underwater to after it's you hold onto a boat. The two characters here are the focus of the series, Nathan Drake and Elena Fisher. Drake is the descendant of the famous explorer Francis Drake, who is meant to be dead in the coffin that they just trawled in. Elena is a journalist that has funded Nathan's expedition to find the coffin so that she can record the whole thing and make a documentary out of it. These characters have only just recently met before the game started, and they're still a little awkward with each other.
You make it sound so dirty.
This awkwardness can also be felt by the player, since the dialogue in these games is saturated with attempts at sarcasm and witty lines, pretty much at every opportunity. Now, I've said in the past that I'm sort of sick and tired of that, and thinks back to a lot of action movies and TV shows. I'd argue that the closest thing that Uncharted gets to is Firefly, since Nathan is more Captain Reynolds than he is Indiana Jones or Han Solo. Sometimes it even sounds like voice actor Nolan North is trying to emulate Nathan Fillion in his lines.
Sometimes I think, what does that mean? Our leave on the wind. What does that mean?
The writing gets better as the series goes on.
Time for another totally non-controversial, totally safe for YouTube iceberg. Hello everybody, welcome back to what we do. Today we are covering the religion and cult iceberg. Now I need to get a few things out of the way before we get started. This iceberg does contain definitive cults, however that doesn't mean everything on this iceberg is a cult per se. The first ones that we're going to be looking at are just sort of fringe religious groups that don't really have that much of a following, and whenever I talk about them, I in no way want to get across the point that they are a cult just because they're on this list. As a matter of fact, even as we go further down on this list, some of the ones that we mentioned into are kind of structured weird. So like we'll have sort of safe ideologies next to very not safe ideologies, and I'm not really sure how that works. So just because something's on here, and even if it's on the same tier as a very dangerous or bad thing, that doesn't mean that in itself is bad. It just means, if anything, that it's just not as well known. Also, and I want to make this very clear, I'm not a theologist by any means. Some of these I've never heard of and educated myself in the past couple days over. Religions are very intensive and long-spanning with their history and the reason practitioners do the things they do and what their belief is. So in no way take me as like the final authority on these things, as I'm getting my information through text, whereas in the real life, these ideologies may be much more one way in emotions or the other, or their practices could be much more spiritual or physical than I make them out to be, or yada yada yada. What I'm saying is, if you're interested in any of these, I encourage you to do your own research, as I am in no way the final authority on what these religions mean. Like I said before, this video is for educational purposes and for entertainment, so I'm not saying anything on here would be offensive to anyone or to tell you or educate you on what your own religion or what someone else's might be. This is entirely a sort of gloss over basic concepts of these ideologies, and I hold full respect to all involved, at least until we get to the bottom tiers where I don't hold any respect for them, but we'll get to that. Speaking of bottom tiers, this is your viewer discretion. I will be more specific as we get closer. But right now saying there are going to be very intense themes in the bottom tiers as we go from sort of like rare religions down to specific events in which people were hurt in very extreme ways in some cases. So this is your warning now. There will be a warning then. But viewer discretion advised. If you're not okay with heavy topics, you may want to sit. With heavy topics, you may want to set this one out, or at least set it out whenever we get to the bottom. There will be timestamps for each tier in the description. So there's your disclaimers. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get into it. But as always, thank you for watching. So I'm going to do something that I've never done, and I'm going to skip the first two tiers of this iceberg. The reason for it is they're just religions that are rather well known. Like tier 1 had things like Catholicism and Buddhism, and tier 2 had like Mormonism and Surfism, and those are common religions that we're all familiar with. The purpose of this is to kind of learn things that you may not be familiar with, or at least I wasn't familiar with before. So like I said, we're going to skip the first two and move into the first niche ideologies with tier 3. So starting with tier 3, Scientology. Scientology is something that you're definitely familiar with if you've been on the internet for a while, and is a religion that was founded by L. Ron Hubbard. The basic belief system of Scientology is that we as humans are actually Thetans, and was created by an alien known as Xenu, who put us on Earth several million years ago, and will one day come back to take us away from it. Xenu themselves exists as a member of the Galactic Confederacy, and the actual canon for Scientology is most people are interested in his interactions with the world around them. Like, for example, the number of celebrities that are a member of the church.
Oh, wrong fucking remote.
Secret shady undergoings that happen within the church, leading several people to believe that it's all a front for some greater Illuminati conspiracy thing. Stacked on top of that is where some abuse have happened in the church, as well as cover-ups that have
What the fuck am I gonna do?
passed away by odd circumstances. One of the most famous interactions is Tom Cruise, who publicly shamed people for using medicine and
What do I want to do? Do I want to keep doing this mission? Yeah, I'm gonna have to do another one. I'll do one more.
Yes, there are boundaries.
psychiatrists saying that the church's teaching should be all you need. And yeah, stuff like that, it just gets kind of weird.
Much has been hidden from us, Deimos. The old ruins beneath the surface must surely contain the deepest and darkest secrets. Find a way to get inside, and the Necroloid will guide you through. See what's happening down there.
Nation of Islam was founded by Wallace Muhammad in Chicago. I also want to say this now because it applies to this one. If at any point I say that something has, say, core Christian values or core Church of Latter-day Saint values, it in no way means that this group is representative of the whole of that ideology. To give you an example that you may be more familiar with, the KKK, for example, had beliefs that came
my charger on everything.
Judaic prophecy. But they are in no way representative of Christianity across the world as a whole. The same applies to this. So if at any point I say that this has ideas of Islam or Judaism or whatever, it's just saying that they share some of the values with those people, not that they are what.
Come on.
Making sure. The reason I specify that now is because Nation of Islam is a very fringe group that believes in full black supremacy. They believe that African Americans are the true chosen people of God, and that white people specifically were created thousands of years ago as an experiment by evil scientists. No, I'm not kidding. So by that logic, white people are fake and have no souls. And according to their belief, one day God will come back and take exclusively the African Americans to heaven and leave all of the soulless people to die, I guess. They're also super conservative in their belief system, saying that people should dress appropriately and wear very straight-edged attire, and have since opened up the nation to different races as long as you're not white. Christian Science was founded by Mary Eddy. The basic concept is that sickness isn't real and is instead an illusion, and through prayer alone, you can all sickness. This belief system has kind of died down in recent years, with auto proponents saying that, well, I guess medicine helps, but only if you also pray about it, and has worked its way into other natural sciences as well. LaVeyan Satanism was founded by Anton LaVey. The core principles of religion come from Friedrich Nietzsche and Abraham. Basically ideas that nothing really matters and humans should live communally. The thing about LaVeyan Satanism that not a lot of people get is, while it does share the name, it is not the direct worship of Satan himself. Instead, it's more so of a worship of humanity itself. The religion is
that's smart.
And they don't have any beliefs in worshiping higher god or power, instead just existing and if it feels good, do it. As well as pertaining some aspects of magic beliefs, they are very similar to the beliefs of the Antichrist, even if inadvertently so. See, a lot of people have the idea that the Antichrist in biblical prophecy is just an evil figure that acts like the devil. But in actuality, it is a forerunner for the devil that instead turns people to themselves instead of God. So in that fashion, LaVeyan Satanism kind of falls in line with that as a way of getting people to focus on the inward man rather than the outward body or outward spirit. I don't know, it's just an interesting parallel that I found while researching this, that while not directly worshiping Satan, it is technically through cause and effect getting across the border of Satan. So, data flow. Amish Old Order is what a lot of people think of whenever they think of Amish in general. However, if you thought regular Amish were strict and only wearing certain materials, Old Order Amish aren't allowed to wear things like buttons, zippers, or bright colors. Not only that, but men are not allowed to cut their beards, as women are not allowed to cut their hair, and they maintain more traditional ideas, such as a very hardcore belief in Christian pacifism, as in the Bible is a last resort. And they don't maintain church bodies, instead choosing to worship at members' houses from time to time, as in the whole idea that God is in place instead of on earth. Falun Gong is a Buddhist Taoist religion in China. Despite being a very peaceful religion of meditation and independence, as well as examining the inner self, the Chinese government did not take kindly to a fast-growing religion that did not have control of it. So therefore, in 1999, they locked down the religion and made it illegal. With no exaggeration, China literally killed thousands of Falun Gong members in jail, with rumors even persisting that their bodies were used for the underground Chinese organ trade. It's an example of extreme religious prejudice within a country's government. Voodoo is the roots of the very popular, or at least famous, voodoo. The roots of voodoo are very interesting, as they came from African countries into the American South and mixed with the indigenous culture at the time, and created this sort of blend between two different kinds of native beliefs. Even some of the beliefs in gods and spirits can be seen as a sort of combination between African Islam and American Christianity. While there is a core belief system, what voodoo is most known for is its practicality in magic and how performances of rituals and spells can lead to physically unattainable things
We need to do
in the real
something
world.
with the
Messianic Jews are essentially Jewish traditions that believe in Messiah or Jesus. Or in other words, it is the religion of Judaism. They also incorporate the New Testament. It's an interesting example of sort of a middle ground that's met between supposedly entirely religions. This concept international society of Christian consciousness. ISKCON holds several traditional deities such as Vishnu and Krishna. However, they are much more physical with their interpretation, partaking of their worship primarily through functions of singing and dance. Because of this, festivals are a very important part of the Islamic tradition. However, despite this, there are very reserved other ideas, such as the giving, gambling, or intoxicants. Also, in the disturbing room, as per everyone was confused by Kith for some reason. It's the word kiss, pronounced like Mike Tyson, so Kith, and I use it to not get demonetized whenever I'm talking about naughty stuff. And like it or not, I've been doing this full time. I wouldn't be monetized. You'll be familiar with Gnosticism if you watch the conspiracy theory iceberg. However, for those that don't, Gnosticism is essentially Christianity with a polytheistic idea of lesser gods. What that means is, yes, Christ and the Godhead exist, however, there are smaller gods that are in charge of things. earth. And the reason that thing's having honor is because earth was made by the God. Besides that, a lot of it's more like magic, spiritual sense than standard Christianity. Like, for example, instead of sin and redemption, they also follow the idea of pollution and enlightenment, saying that things are not necessarily wrong, they're just not understood. Opus Dei, from all of my research, just seems to be a sort of laid-back version of Catholicism. Like, for example, they don't partake in big church gatherings or mass, and while they believe in the teachings of Catholicism, they more so believe that every person themselves is a layman or worker for God, and the organization itself is much smaller, with the entire thing having about 2,000 priests. Kabbalah is often described as Jewish mysticism, but shortly it's about understanding the barrier between God and man. In other words, there is this sort of fabric that exists around us that separates us from the higher realm of being. So a lot of this ideology is a way of sort of meditating on introspection in order to rise. You must defeat it. Neo-shamanism is an innovation of beliefs. It's sort of an amalgamation of several different native tribes and modern steps.
One arm is a good start. The Necromancer remains 82% combat effective. I confess I had my concerns, but that was expertly handled. The Guardian is completely disabled.
Okay, that was easy.
Is Hinduism. However, there is a very heavy reliance in rituals over beliefs. Or basically, doing specific acts is more important than simply believing or saying something. As you can imagine, rituals are a big deal in religion, as well as oral traditions which are passed down instead of written or transcribed as the standard with most religions. That is it with Tier 3. We are now on to Tier 4. Starting with Hardline, the letter that YouTube won't let me say because it's dumb for some reason. Anon. Blank Anon rose to popularity in recent years after the American 2016 election. The basic belief is that all of the world's elites are conspiring in a sort of secret society in order to maintain control of the world from behind the veil. This cabal of the elite is responsible, according to Anon's theories, of everything from human abductions to the results of world elections. It's very reliant on the ideas of secret societies being proliferated across the world. 5% Nation was started by a man named Clarence Smith, who left the Nation of Islam. Clarence Smith felt very led by Malcolm X, who was an at-the-time big member in the Nation of Islam, to go and start his own group, which he called 5% Nation, or Nation of Gods and Earths. 5% Nation was basically Nation of Islam, only even more so. Clarence renamed himself Allah the Father, and the word 5% Nation comes from the idea that 85% of the world is ignorant, 10% of it is wrong, 5% of the truth are good enough to change it. Speaking of the Nation of Islam, more so, rather than just thinking that white people were created as an experiment, according to 5% Nation, white people are literal demons that have risen up and down as a means of achieving God's kingdom. And it's basically a French option. Most of the brotherhood on here, I know it originates in Egypt. However, I am not qualified to talk about this, nor was I able to find information that made me feel like I was qualified to talk about this. So rather than sounding dumb, I'm just going to skip it. Sorry. Peyote religion is a name often church. What's interesting is the Native American church kind of came as a result of Christian missionaries coming to the native tribes. So instead of believing in several spirits, they believed in the Great Spirit, which according to members is synonymous with Jesus Christ. The reason they're called the Peyote religion is because they believe that peyote can be used as a gateway to speak to the Great Spirit, or to at least escape this existence for a limited time. Because of this, in the majority of their practices and worship services, peyote is used. Marco cult is really interesting, and I've never heard of it. Post-World War II, there were specific groups of people, specifically in Melanesia, who were given gifts by more technologically advanced societies such as the United States and Great Britain. Upon coming back to the these people born this, it was found that they were imitating the acts of the soldiers that were there when they brought the first Americans. So, in other words, whenever the ships would show back up, they would be holding sticks like rifles and walking around in troop formation, thinking that by mimicking the people that brought them gifts, they could bring them back. It's a very interesting sort of like glass bubble of how a society would react if not given information about how things like that carry out, how technology advances. It's a really cool rabbit hole for that. Church of Subgenius kind of exists as a religion. Their prophet, J.R. Dawes, was a northern salesman, and because religion is a salesman. And according to them, all other religions in the world are part of a greater conspiracy in order to keep smart-thinking people down. But at the same time, they believe in a lot of popular gods. Their main god is known as Jehovah One, but they also believe in like Odin and other deities, I guess. What's interesting is, while this kind of feels like a Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster thing, it seems as if some people actually believe in the religion nowadays. That or I just took the bait. Either way, good on you. Chaos magic is a modern name given to results-based magic. Or in other words, rather than getting sort of ideas or self-enlightenment or something like that out of magic, you get a very physical, obtainable goal. This is what a lot of people think in their head whenever they think of magic itself. While there are beliefs, they're kind of secondary to the point, and chaos magic users will actually manipulate their belief system in order to get whatever result they want. Society for Ethical Culture is the godless religion. They believe that morality exists apart from faith, and therefore people do not need to be faithful or believe in God in order to be good people. They have churches and services, but rather than talking about a specific god or worship, they instead talk about how to better yourself and how to be a better person. They're big on concepts such as motivation and philanthropy. I believe that the individual should always strive to be the best they can, regardless of whatever higher order justice is on. Mandaism is hard to put a pin on, but the chief idea is that it's sort of like a Gnostic Abrahamic faith, sort of. In the Quran, it mentions people way back who could have been a sort of Mandaist, although it's not confirmed. And their main distinction from Abrahamic ideas such as Christianity and Islam is that they are very spiritual with their ideas, such as they believe that after death,
I'll do like 3 times of that.
which is what we see in the stars, as well as believing in energy of areas such as Old World, which is where they make the majority of their stay. However, it's hard to kind of figure out a ton about them as they're very secret and not a lot of members, so make of that what you will. Romuva can best be described as Lithuanians before Christianity. Or in other words, it was Lithuanians with a much more polytheist sort of pagan idea of what God is. A lot of their beliefs come from Baltic folklore, and there is a big emphasis on nature and ancestry. So rather than so much worshiping a one god deity, it is more so ideas of worshiping what is around you and the people who came before you. Chinese underground church is essentially Western Christianity in communist China. See, religions that do not directly answer to the Chinese government are illegal. And while they may allow it to exist to some capacity, if a church gets to the degree to actually call itself a church, they'll immediately shut it down. Because of this, underground churches, or house churches as they're called, meet in the houses of certain members. This is as a way to avoid persecution, and as far as fringe religions go, they have to be if they want to stay operating. We are now on to Tier 5, which is getting into a bit more of the sort of out there ideas. We'll see what I mean. First of Tier 5, the Igbo Jews, which is essentially Judaism incorporated into
That's all fucking weird.
Nigeria, follow to every degree traditional Judaism. However, the difference is they believe that they themselves are the chosen people of God. Or in other words, they think themselves to be the true Israelites, except the people of Israel, which is the reason they practice Judaism. So they take. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have Christian identity, which is the idea that only whites, such as Anglo-Saxons and Germanics, are the descendants of Abraham and therefore God's chosen people. However, this isn't really a religion as much as it is an idea that exists in some religious groups. And some of the other ideas they get into are also weird, like serpent seed doctrine, which we talked about down the iceberg. You can look that one up for yourself. And as with most of the things on here, it is generally shunned by the majority of people who practice the religion as well. Raelism is the idea that humans are not existent as the product of some deity, but were instead invented by an alien known as Elohim. Because of that, oddly enough, it's an atheistic religion, believing that there is no God and we are simply the results of a sort of science experiment. According to them, Elohim sent down 40 prophets in order to foretell whenever he would come back to take his experiments with him, and among these 40 prophets were Buddha and Jesus. General consensus is that they are strong proponents of science and also believe in the ancient aliens theory, or the idea that aliens came down and started humanity as we know it, and they hope to find immortality through the use of cloning. So, that's cool. Wahhabism is, from all the information I could find, conservative Islam. However, much like the Brotherhood one I mentioned earlier, there was just not enough information for me to find anything substantial to say about it, and rather than looking like an idiot, I'm just going to move on. Shinriko, also known as Aleph, is a controversial group to say the least.
Oh, never mind. Fuck the squad.
From Shiva to general Christianity,
Fucking
to
assholes.
yoga, and even Nostradamus, with one of their main proponents being that of a doomsday prophecy, or more specifically, that the U.S. is the beast mentioned in the book of Revelations that will bring an end to the known world. Because of this, certain extremists of the group were responsible for the Tokyo sarin attacks in 1995 that killed several innocent people. However, even though that happened, and we're going to see examples later on in the list of groups that it can't really be argued that
Okay, I gotta do one more. I got you, bro.
of the bad thing that happened, I will say for this one that it seems
So I gotta do another one.
disagreed with the attacks.
Fast
I
travel.
don't want to condemn an entire ideology off of the actions of the people. So, just making that clear. Santa Muerta is pretty much a female personification of death. Quite literally, a skeleton that is dressed up in female's clothes.
That's the only one I can do right now.
It's another example of Mexican and Spanish culture having a very rooted belief in ideas of death, all the way from celebrations to things that the Spanish Inquisition celebrated first came over. It's a modern concept of worshiping death in a very upbeat and charismatic mood as what one might expect. Latter Rain is a movement that has happened in some Pentecostal churches after World War II. It essentially reincorporated the idea that in the modern sense, the spirit can interact directly with humanity as a means of performing physical actions. Or, in other words, one can become Holy Spirit filled and do things such as healing or speak in tongues. It was a response to the evangelical revival which had just occurred. It was one of the first parts of something known as the charismatic movement, or as historians call it, the age in which religion became popular with the idea of words and catches in order to get new converts in. Shugendo is an interesting combination of folk religion and Buddhism. A lot of their belief resides in the supernatural, and even the idea that if one is close enough to ideas,
Oh, it's fucking funny.
these sort of supernatural powers. What's really cool about the religion is they exist in the majority, at least, in mountain ranges across Japan. So their temples are hidden in the backs of these giant mountain ranges. So you can just be going over a completely green area, and then there's a giant temple in front of you. It's a pretty neat idea. Dalit Buddhism is an Indian reinterpretation of Buddhism. It goes directly against the idea of the Indian caste system and promotes the ideas of equality amongst people. It also exists as more of a physical religion than most, or in other words, ideas of so much about spiritualism and praying as much as actions and action in public. Sedevacantibus, probably how you pronounce it, is an offshoot of Catholicism who believes that the Holy See position, or in other words, the Pope, has been left empty for several years. Different groups have different ideas of how long it's been gone, some dating back to the 20s, others recently as the 80s. But the general consensus is that the Catholic Church as it is now is not saying what the Catholic Church should, and therefore the leader...
Well, I hope it's a babe. If not, it is what it is.
We'll see more specific examples of this later on in the class. Nuwabianism was started by Dwight York in 1991 and exists as a country in the UFO religion. Dwight York managed to grow the religion to such a degree that in Putnam County, Georgia, he built a complex known as Tamaray, which was inspired off the Egyptian pyramids. Most of their ideas revolved around the idea that aliens have been interacting with human society for a long time, and that we need to prepare for their return. However, we'll never know how that went, because the group was disbanded in 2004, whenever Dwight was sentenced to 135 years in prison for finance fraud and touching kids. So, yeah. The Cult of Angels, or Yazdanism as it's called, is essentially a form of pre-Islamic Kurds, or in other words, how the Kurds existed before Islam came to the region. They believe in Zoroastrianism and the Anunnaki, which are a specific version of the ancient aliens concept, and their belief system is interesting, as they have a sort of pantheon in which they accept several different ideas of the Abrahamic faith, and in practice they incorporate both the Bible and the Quran. We are now on to Tier 6, and here we go. The Moorish Science Temple is an offshoot of Islam that believes that African Americans are the direct descendants of the Moabites. Yep, the organization was started by Noble Ali, who said he met an Egyptian priest who said that he was blessed and an incarnation of a prophet that was made in order to his people. The group itself is very mixed. Probably himself saying that he has found a version of the Quran that has been lost to everyone else, and they won't really let anyone else read it, and it's the book for their religion. So, yeah. What was interesting in researching this, there was one article I was reading, I forget where it was talking about this group, and it's like, Noble Ali made this in order to give African Americans of the community something to do. I'm like, are you sure about that? I don't think so. I think he wanted to be God. Fundamentalist polygamous desert compound Mormons are the extreme conservative branch of Mormonism that is shown by the entirety of Mormonism. Mormonism itself was founded by Joseph Smith. However, from the original teachings, the religion has come a long way. That is not, however, the case with the specific group of Mormons that we're talking about. These specific, very conservative groups of Mormons believe in things such as polygamy, continuous revelations, or, in other words, at any point someone can have a word from God, and therefore add on to the canon of Scripture, and united order of God, which is just a way of saying what should exist within the continent. There are very few of these, no more than a total of 10,000, and all of these people have been excommunicated from the actual Church of Latter-day Saints for the practice of polygamy. So, yeah. Ringing Cedars and Astasianism started in Russia in 1997. It comes from a book called The Ringing Cedars of Russia, in which the author said that a person who was known as Anastasia was
Let's see if we get to JoJo reference.
how the world truly operates. The religion itself believes in a very holistic belief in what God and the world is, and that they all exist as sort of an intertwined being. And the actual word itself, Ringing Cedars, comes from the idea that there are several vibrations that exist everywhere, and that is the interconnected layer that holds all of the world together. Also, this religion lives together in these sort of communal settlements, primarily around the Taiga area of the Siberian wilderness. Appalachian snake churches came off the holiness movement at the turn of the century. The majority of practitioners come from the Pentecost faith, and the whole thing exists itself as another part of the charismatic movement I talked about earlier. The guy who started it, George Hensley, drove from place to place.
Most people watch JoJo's.
To do snake handling. The core belief of it comes from the disciples in the New Testament. Whenever Jesus tells them that they don't have to fear snakes, they can pick them up and they won't be hurt. And the story of whenever several people are bit by dangerous snakes on the island of Ibiza with Paul, and Paul says that they'll all be killed. So George took that idea and applied it to the modern day. He doubled down and said that if anyone is bitten and killed by a venomous snake, then they just weren't faithful. Which in 1955, George was bitten and killed by a venomous snake. Snake handling is very dangerous. A lot of people died doing it, so much that we've had legislation in many states. In Kentucky, where they specifically said snakes cannot be used for religious purposes. Moonies, also known as the unification movement, comes from its founder's son, Moon. They're most known as being people who have advanced weddings, but they also have some other interesting traditions, such as the original text, as well as a specific flag that is draped over members of the church's casket at the funeral. According to their core belief, Jesus did not complete his mission on earth and was killed by children. Because of this, some Bethans, which was founded as the reincarnation of Jesus and the new Messiah. And they basically
just one.
normal religion outside of that.
That's fast.
Just the belief that they have a current living Messiah. Ravita's path, also known as Venetia, is a sort of spiritualistic belief that originated in gurus and hold a belief that the human soul is a part of God itself. The religion was closely identified with Sikhism until in 2009, since killed a guru of Ravidas, and now they're not so closely related since Michael teachings is a sort of belief system that originated from the Ouija board in the later 1970s. In San Francisco, a group of friends away on the Ouija board in which someone identified themselves as Michael began talking to them. On subsequent sessions, Michael continued to talk to them, in which they began to write down his teachings, and then published all of their Ouija book that started its own belief system. And if you're curious what the teachings are, basically, agape, love everybody, and psychology. Anti-Israel Zionist, I'll be honest, I didn't understand. I thought that it was saying that Zion, as in the was important, and even that religion there are, then I saw something else that said it wasn't important, and to be honest, again, I'm just not sure about this one, so I will leave this to you all. Alright, here we are, tier 6, and we are getting into it. So, Greek Orthodox old calendar is one
Oh, there's another protein here.
I've ever seen, and I normally wouldn't say that about an entire religion, but from everything I've read, like, come on, guys. So from everything I've read, Greek Orthodox old calendar is the exact same as Greek Orthodox, only this is they did not, in the 1500s, transition from the Julian calendar to the revised Julian calendar. What's the difference? Well, according to the revised Julian calendar, if the year is divisible by 100, it is not only a year, unless, of course, divided by 900, it comes out to 2 or 600. What difference does that make? Well, from now until the year 2800, it will be one day. The reason the calendar was revised like that was because it would basically line people up with the Gregorian calendar. However, Greek Orthodox old calendar said no, and they kept their old calendar, and it's entirely separate from religion to this day because they didn't want to change the leap years.
Do you do Zoroardo?
The ghost dance is a concept that was incorporated into several Western and American traditions. Ghost dance is believed to sort of been an offshoot of round dancing, in a more sacred spiritual manner as a way of contacting either the dead or the spirits. This would be done by the Native Americans to receive everything from guidance, to battle preparedness, to even the halt of westward expansion. This was started by a native named Jack Wilson, who worked as a sort of prophet going from tribe to tribe, teaching people the ghost dance.
Oh, I went the wrong fucking way.
With some groups taking certain parts of it and adapting it to their culture, and others taking just the ideas, and it kind of worked its way to be a part of several different cultures. That was
I have activated all of the generators.
See, Jack taught the Lakota tribe shortly before the Battle of Wounded Knee, in which the natives were massacred by the white settlers. Because of this, several tribes that Jack traveled to afterwards did not want to incorporate it, thinking that it may be some sort of bad omen. For example, the Navajo wasn't part of it. And because of this, the dance just kind of faded out, and it's not really practiced in real regards now. However, the traces of it can be taken back to the roots of several different native ideologies. Branch Davidians were began by a man named David Koresh in Waco, Texas. David Koresh believed himself to be the forerunner of Christ, and that he was set up as a witness before the vote will. In order to be ready for it, David Koresh assembled his people into one commune that existed in Waco, Texas, with the basic idea of giving up worldly pleasures and hope for spiritual life. Of course, that didn't stop him from playing music, being the only one in the commune who was allowed to have children. But again, it's neither here nor there. To those around the commune, they said that Koresh and the Davidians were very American and just seemed like your average old people. However, the people were propelled to a state of thinking, and in 1993, the ATF attempted to raid the compound in hope of finding illegal weapons. However, during the raid, the ATF killed 76 people, the majority of them being women and children. And needless to say, that was the end of the Branch Davidians. But remember, kids, there's no law so trivial that the government won't kill you for it. The problem that happens with the Branch Davidians is a lot of people sort of justify it because, don't get me wrong, David Koresh was a horrible person. It is a known fact that he was abusing at least 2 children within the compound. However, if you're trying to keep children from being abused, maybe the solution isn't to kill all of them. It's just a thought. Moving on. MHFM stands for the Most Holy Family Monastery. This is an example of the 7 vacantists, the things that don't believe in the Pope, that I mentioned earlier, and Phil Morning. What's interesting is the ways they sort of circumnavigate the Catholic Church. Like, for example, all of their communication has to be brought down from the Catholic Church in order to officially be Catholic. Since they don't believe in the Pope, they don't want to do it through the Vatican. So they get a sort of Byzantine moderator to technically, like, sanctify it. And in 2020, they got so fed up with the Catholic Church that they said it is heresy to attend a Pope-ordained Catholic service. Also in research, for some reason, I kept finding information that they denied the Holocaust. So, go off, I guess. One Hebrew roots is essentially evangelical Christianity with the Torah from Judaism. What that means is they really push home a lot of the Old Testament ideas that were prevalent in Judaism, such as the Sabbath and the 10 Commandments. And they even believe, off of the ideas before, that this is a natural conclusion before the return of Christ. They believe that the first step of the modern Western American church was that of holiness, and then faith healing, and then charismaticness, and now Judaism, meaning that if they continue to act this way, it will speed up the return of Christ. Independent Scientology, also known as the Free Zone, has all of the beliefs of Scientology with none of the organizational part. They go off of the saying the work was free, keep it so, implying that the Church of Scientology is so caught up with money and politics that's non-existent as religion. So this is a group of people that kind of do away with the concept that the entire idea of Scientology was made up just to be made up, because they don't want anything to do with the organization. They just believe in the ideas of Xenu and the space opera. In research for this, the Church of Scientology called them squirrels to their face. Which is
Ooh, I
so
got 5.
funny. Like, it was an interview asking them about what they think of, like, the Free Zone Scientologists, and the church leader's like, oh, you mean the squirrels? Rajneesh, also known as Osho, began a new religion commune in Oregon. The core beliefs of the religion were kind of weird. Like, it's sort of the idea that everyone can get there in their own kind of way, and some ideas of Christianity, some Islam, yada. However, it seemed to me like the core reason of this religion existing was so that Rajneesh could have power. And this is kind of supported by the salmonella attacks that occurred in the nearby town of Oregon, in which Rajneesh's followers poisoned hundreds of people with salmonella as a means of somehow winning the election in Rajneesh's favor, which didn't work, and Rajneesh got deported, and a bunch of people got arrested. Other core ideas of the religion were like family's bad, because the idea is that you focus on your spiritual self rather than children. So parents who join this religion would leave their kids behind in order to follow Rajneesh around. And also free love and stuff like that was encouraged. Just don't get married. Freedomites are essentially a group of true communal anarchists existing in Saskatchewan, Canada. They're against everything from land ownership to public schools and using animals for work, and are most famously known for protesting nude.
What you need and fucking went to the wrong mission.
So therefore, being naked is the perfect existence. And other than that, they just exist on communes and try their best to live autonomously. The Source family, started by Father Yod, is often equated as being one of the first examples of the organic hippie idea. The family, as its goal, were very into an idea known as the Age of Aquarius, which is basically this overarching idea in astrology. What's way more interesting than that is the weird ideas that Father Yod came up with. For example,
let's go do a hard one.
13 was recorded and played in a restaurant and was used as a means of spreading his message. He started this
I'll do one more and I'm done with all of them.
Out of a 3-bedroom house in LA. Also, more weird details about him. He possibly murdered Jean Ingram's husband so that he could sleep with her. And speaking of sleeping with, or should I say kissing with, he had 14 wives to which he had children by nearly all of them. And he died in a hang gliding accident because having never hang glided before, he assumed he could do it, which he could not. He may have been like a really bad dude in real life, I don't know. These stories were just too funny to not laugh at. Reactive Satanism is probably what you think of whenever you think of the word Satanism. Also referred to as adolescent Satanism, it is the idea of taking
they're really freeze.
Satanism and Christianity and simply inverting the values. For example, believing that Satan is Lucifer, evil and the Prince of Darkness, and that he should be praised for it. The core beliefs of the people is that evil is good, and we should perpetuate as much horribleness in the world as we can as a means of circulating the sort of status quo. While a lot of this can be seen as sort of edgy behavior, it doesn't change the fact that they are perpetuating bad things that happen to people, or at the very least bad advice, and is the definitive and literal saint worship. We are now on to Tier 8, and we are officially at the point that I do not feel bad calling these people out anymore. Starting with the Bertholds Walkers. This is in reference to a specific sect of the Amish tradition that was started by Sam Mullen in Bertholds, Ohio. If you thought old order Amish were strict, Sam Mullen started a new society because he did not think they were strict enough. While I couldn't find specific details on actions or practices that he did throughout his teachings, it was to the point that whenever he set himself up as the chief bishop of the commune, only one would show up when you're supposed to have three in traditional Amish belief, which led future bishops to think that maybe he's not actually supposed to be a bishop. Whatever the case, Mullen excommunicated the deacon, to which 9 members of the commune were decided to leave, to which he then excommunicated each one of them. Keep in mind a couple things. For one, there was only like 40 people in the entire commune at the time, and excommunication is a big deal, because in the Amish belief, if you're excommunicated by one group, you cannot rejoin to anything. So that wasn't just Mullen saying you can't come back here, that's him saying you can't be Amish anywhere, which is a big deal. This was such a point of contention that after several failed investigations, eventually 300 bishops from different Amish communities came together and made the ruling that the Mullen excommunications were null and void because he was too far on them for the excommunication. Mullen did not like this momentum shortly after the beard attacks. As mentioned earlier, beards are a big deal in the Amish tradition. So people from Mullen's group ran around, breaking into people's houses, which is how they got the name after their followers. Eventually they were arrested along with Mullen himself and charged with hate crimes and extortion. Some of the traditions were weird too, like it was very apparent that they did not identify as Christian, even though they supported They made sure Sunday was not a big deal, there was no Sabbath. They stuck to the Old Testament, which again makes sense. And then, oddly enough, kithing was totally fine. Not totally fine, it's not like it was encouraged, but whereas in other groups it was a shameful thing, they just didn't care. Which, why be so strict about the other stuff? Whatever. Children of God, which is as the family international, was a sort of apocalyptic. They had ideas of salvation for self and through each other, with an overarching idea that the world will live a system. Children of God is rather well known for the controversies they were into, and rightfully so, as one of the group's main ideologies was that like free love at all times, with whoever you want at any point, feel free. There's a documentary of them on Netflix, which in the documentary you can see at random times all over the place. This didn't just extend to people within the community. This extended to their idea of God. So much so that one of their chief strategies in order to get new converts was something called flirty fishing, in which the women were encouraged to go out and be street hookers, and then after doing the stuff, use the opportunity to tell them about God. To give you an idea of how awful they were, their Bible tracts that they would hand out would get held up as custom agencies because it was pornography. The group was eventually shut down and several arrested, or at least the original pedophilia charges, as this whole idea of free love doesn't exactly care about age of consent laws. And the founder, David Byrne, eventually died, although the now rebranded Family International is in this weird hypocritical stage where they both support his teachings and then deny he did anything wrong, while also accepting that pedophilia is wrong, and then denying that he did it, which he did, and it's so dumb, it's weird. A lot of the stuff that I'm not mentioning here is really gross. As I mentioned earlier, there's a documentary on Netflix, which if you're embarrassed with this worth your time, called The Children of God. But, yeah, really gross people. Moving on. People still feel conservatives, and people still feel like it's adding to the toxicity level. The core beliefs of the idea was this combination of Christianity and communism. However, that really didn't matter because the real core belief was whatever Jim Jones said. Jim Jones was charismatic, and he sort of had this really tactic in which he was interested in his society, and then eventually traveled there. While the group was located in San Francisco, they had several instances of people trying to get away by their beliefs, or else knowing they would be down by the society. Eventually, facing public scrutiny, Jim Jones, along with several of his followers, moved to Atlanta in South America and started their own town, which was named very commonly Jonestown. By 1978, there were over 300 people in the colony. That was until Representative Leo Ryan investigated with a journalist team on accounts of child abuse. While investigating, a few members of the colony came up to the representative and said that they believed him, which the representative allowed them. While trying to leave from a nearby airstrip, Jonestown came on his guns and killed the representative, 3 journalists, and wanted to jump down members. Later that evening, realizing that he wasn't going to get to play God anymore, except for this one last time, he had the entire commune in cyanide-laced Kool-Aid, killing a total of 915 people. Jim Jones himself. It's a very frustrating case because it's always just felt to me like because he realized he lost, he wanted everyone else to lose. And it's also an example of what one person with the right words and enough manipulation can get away with. Nicaean heresies was kind of hard to find something on. I believe this is in reference to the Creed. It's basically an idea that comes from the roots of Orthodox Christianity and puts away ideas such as Arianism, which is the idea that Christ is between that of human body, and Culinarianism, which is the idea that Christ had no soul, Neosterianism, which is the idea that Christ had two souls, God, and Euphorianism, which is the idea that Christ was God and therefore could be a sacrifice for him. And it's basically just 4 rules saying that if someone believes these things, therefore Christ can be what it says in the Bible. So I'm guessing that this would be believing in those 4 things, or one of those 4 things, would essentially be with, like, Christianity without Christ. I don't know, make your own opinions. Siberian Old Believers are Eastern Orthodox Christians maintaining the beliefs of the Russian Church. Or in other words, they still hold fast to the ideas of the translation and the customs rather than the ideas of Christianity. Also, every example I can find of it exists in the middle of nowhere. They travel hundreds of miles through the Siberian wilderness to find a small church, and it's probably that himself that is the Siberian, which is why they have the name Siberian. NIXVA was a company that was used as a front for it. On the surface, it was a multi-level marketing scheme. However, beneath the surface, there's a group known as the Dominus Sororian. I'm not pronouncing it. It went by DOS, essentially the leader of the company had been taking women and keeping them as slaves all the way to the point of putting his name on them, in which other higher up levels of the company also had slaves. This entire thing was happening in 2018 and was one of the first mainstream examples of trafficking existing at higher level elite circles. Soldiers of Heaven are in the Islamic doomsday cult. They hold the belief that their God will return the guardian of the vault approaches Earth. You must therefore they will cause a lot of damage on Earth. There are very, very few of them, less than 1,000, and the majority of them exist as followers who have no evidence to do so. However, it's a belief from several Iranian officials that this ideology is dangerous to the given beings. Lucy Colbert Archer was one of those set of men who wanted to know what the Pope, who in 1998 was declared by others set of to be Pope Pius VIII. Essentially, they all agree that this guy knows what he's talking about, and they don't like the real Pope, so this guy's Pope now. Which is then made all of them bishops, and then they made each other bishops, and the equivalent of a bunch of bros like all shaking hands and giving high fives to each other, and I really like it. Especially all these pictures of him standing in his backyard with his Pope. I love it. It's cute. Eastern Lightning is an Asian belief that is pretty much the same as Christianity, except they believe that Jesus currently exists on Earth in the form of a Chinese wolf. This comes from the book of Revelations when it says that the lightning goes across the eastern sky, so they will return our Lord, which is why the movie is called Eastern. It began in 1995 when a woman who has never been officially identified, but it is pretty well understood, goes by the name of Yang Ziming. I'm sorry, I butchered this. Who said that she experienced forces from God, so I'm sure she knows things. Later, a man who was at the time leader of the church, named Zhao Weishan, said that she was not only receiving messages from Jesus, but that she was Jesus. And they just kind of operate besides that with knowing Jesus is the Mormon in the congregation. Has got a lot of bad publicity, and I can't really verify if it's the group of Christians to do these things or if it's just radicals. For example, in 2002 there were kidnappings of other nearby religions that supposedly are members of Eastern Lightning. Furthermore, before the 2012 December 2013 world event, there were civil riots that started up in China that was once again blamed on the church. And in 2014, a man walked into a cafe, and after people did a which he killed behind the counter, and he later identified as Mike. So are these a bunch of zealots who feel extra pumped to do crazy things because they think their God's good for them, or is it just a bad trip? I don't know, but I know that Western Christians in the area, or more specifically church members, say that what Eastern Lightning is a charisma organization. So think of that one. We are now on to tier.
Team to extreme.
Start farms.
Tier 9, the final tier, which is very specific instances of crazy cult activities. The first of which being Juhaman al-Atiyabi, I promise I'm trying to these, in 1979 seized the Great Mosque in Saudi Arabia. See, he believed that the Saudi government was weak. His father and grandfather fought wars for them, and he didn't like the idea that Saudi was making deals with Western society. So, him and 500 of his followers stormed the mosque and in 2 weeks held to it. The standoff was eventually ended after British GIG and commandos came in order to direct the Saudi's attack. Atiyabi and several of his men were captured and headed to their crimes. But it's still a pretty big deal historically because he got enough people together in order to take the criminals. Things like that. Talk about, like, why was there a temple? Why was there a pyramid? Why did he drive this person right before? Why? Alright, so I'm going to get, like, Odyssey, it's this awful, I'll talk about whenever I do it, but I'm going to make videos on there and I have on YouTube. If you really want to talk about this, please get the video zapped immediately. I'll see what's happening. We'll get there. Manson family was represented only by the started by Charles Manson. The group was, on the surface, your standard hippie-level stuff. They like taking parts of drugs and living on communes. However, whenever you got into the beliefs of the cult that you started to see cracks. For example, members of the commune thought that the leader, Charles Manson, was the reincarnation of Jesus himself. Manson himself preached on a coming apocalyptic race war that was going to begin and how they needed to begin a race war in order to confirm that they'll be safe. This was an event that Manson referred to as Helter Skelter in reference to the Beatles song. This led to, in 1969, the Sharon Tate murders, as they're called, in which he had several of his followers go out and kill 9 people over the course of 7 weeks. And what's famous is which whenever they broke into Sharon's house, killed them, and staged it in order to look like African Americans did it in such a way to start a race war, to which they said that they would eventually come out on top. And all the research I've done about Manson over the years, it seems to me that he's a genuine Einstein. He was a type of person that liked to be in control, liked to have others do his bidding, and he wasn't afraid to hurt other people to get it. The LeBaron family probably exists on the farthest possible extreme of Mormonism that you could reach. For one, they were kicked out of the church for polygamy, but the son of the leader, Alma LeBaron, said that he had dreams where he talked to the prophets and that he himself was meant to be the replacement for Joseph Smith. Eventually, they started a compound of members in Chihuahua, Mexico. They have had several odd altercations with the locals, such as one in which one of the sons was kidnapped and held for ransom. The family didn't pay ransom in order to not encourage ransoming kidnappings, so they let the son go. The son then went on this whole political thing as to say that ransoming is bad, to which the cartel then got 2 more members of the commune and then killed them because the son was talking about kidnappings. There was also an odd altercation that took place regarding a well on their property in which they apparently shot at the neighbors for getting close to the well. And then on the Sonora Highway, which you may remember from a couple of years ago in 2019, 3 women and 6 children from the compound were killed by the cartel, although it is believed in that case that the cartel staked them for a right. Alright, so this one here. Remember Nation of Islam that I talked about at the beginning, and how essentially like white people bad, and then the Church of Scientology, which even though they don't have any race rules, are primarily white, well, apparently there is an ally between the Nation of Islam and the Church of Scientology. According to the Nation of Islam, because they've been asked about white people awful, why go with a primarily white religion, they have said it's because they have recognized the greater world around us, another world of space and space opera, and the aliens that created us and whatever. And they've gone so much so with this that 700 members of the Nation of Islam have been inducted as part of the Church of Scientology. This is all to return them to a mother will, which is essentially a kind of UFO, which will come down and take them away. Also, the belief of the Nation of Islam is always been white people will be left behind whenever that happens. Although in recent years they've changed their tune after siding, or they sort of sided with the Church of Scientology and said, maybe a few. Lev Tahor is a very niche group of Judaism that only has about 200 members. Most of their beliefs are very conservative compared to normal Judaism, such as very long prayers, arranged marriages at teenage years, and the females are to be covered from head to toe from the ages of 3 on. They're also anti-Zionist, which means they don't really believe in the sanctity of Israel itself, and exists sort of nomadically, such as their compound began in Canada and exists currently in Mexico. In Canada, however, they were ran out of the country after several investigations of child abuse, because that whole teenage marriage thing isn't always teenager, not teenager, as well as kidnapping children, which, maybe, I don't know. They then moved the compound to Mexico, in which the leader of the church, Shalomo Helbron's, drowned while conducting one of his rituals that he was underwater for. I don't know, it's weird. And the religion's pretty much broken up now, as they've all been arrested by might of the FBI and Interpol, so yeah, that's that. Workers' Institute of Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought is basically just a communist thing. I don't know what else to call it. It had 8 members, including the leader. The leader was a guy named Aravidian Balakrishnan, who was kicked out of the Leninist Marxist group in London. And after his group, which had 14 people in it at the time, was searched for trafficking drugs, he decided to move the group underground with 7 people that were still in it. Those 7 people being all women who took as his wives, and then made do chores and essentially treated them like slaves. So I guess real convenient for him. Oh look, I'm the only guy in a commune of 8 and I need 7 kids. He eventually got arrested for abuse and trafficking and other things. So it's just really lame to think about just one guy. It's fucking like he has a cold and there's 7 people. Like imagine you start a religion and you can't even make a football team out of it. So, Anthill Kids kind of got me down a rabbit hole reading it. And I've got to say, from all the research I've done, this has got to be one of the most disturbing cult reads I have ever done. And there is a ton of information and there's so much to get into that I just decided I'm going to do a separate video on it. Probably shortly after this one comes up. It's not totally independent on what it is. Essentially, a man by the name of Ross Walt started a commune in Ontario, Canada, in which he slowly brought in people over the years, but he slowly became more and more abusive to the point by the end of it there was murders, there was crazy goings on with what he was doing to some of the members, which eventually led to one of the members escaping, telling the police, to which he was then arrested, tried, put in jail for life, and then his cellmate killed him because of it. So yeah, I'm going to do a whole video about it because the specifics are really gruesome, and there's too much to get into on a video that's already too long. So stay tuned for that in here. The reason I hesitate to call him the most evil cult leader I've ever heard of is because of the next one on this list, Marcus Wesson. Marcus Wesson has got to be one of the most frustratingly evil people I've ever read. I want to emphasize with this one is positive and graphic. I'm not going to show any images or say anything
Damage
too overt. It is a rather intense theme. So, again, viewer discretion advised. Okay. Put it bluntly, after he returned from Vietnam, he began living with the woman which he had a son with. However, the woman had a daughter by another man, which, whenever that daughter turned age, the child remarried that child, he then had 10 children with, and then out of all of the girl children, also began abusing them. Yeah, no jokes, this one's just depressing. He had all of the girls homeschooled, and he was the only one allowed to interact with the daughters. The mother wasn't allowed to have contact with her own girls. And he read them a Bible that he wrote himself, in which he said Jesus was a vampire and that he himself was God. He also told them about Armageddon, and told his daughters that they were meant to be his future wives. The girls were also ordered that they were not allowed to talk to their brothers or their mother. As before mentioned, the abuse kept up to a point until which extended family figured out what was going on and got the local police involved. The police then showed up to Marcus's house, in which a standoff began. He walked inside with his gun. The police did not hear gunshots, however, after getting inside. Marcus had killed all 9 people that were in the house. A few of the kids got away, but Marcus managed to kill his wife and all of the children that were in the house at the time. If it makes you feel even a little bit better, he's currently awaiting the death penalty, even though it's been 11 years. And while it's easy to look at these situations and blame other people around, I want to emphasize that the mother at the time, who was also killed by Marcus, was 16, and considering the amount of abuse that she went through, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that she was responsible, or at least in any magnitude that you could shame her over. I think predominantly and alone, Marcus is one of the most evil people I've ever read about, and all the blame squarely falls on him. What I mean by there's such a frustratingly evilness to it is similar to Jim Jones. It's like whenever they can't play God anymore, they just literally end everyone else's lives around them. Only with Marcus, it seems to be much more malicious and just depraved. I'll try to perk everyone back up at the end, but that's enough of that. Let's move on. Heaven's Gate refers to the cult that was started in 1974 by the couple Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Russell. The two believed themselves to be the witnesses of Revelation, or in other words, in the book of Revelations of the Christian Bible, when it says there will be 2 witnesses who foretell the coming of Christ. They managed to catch a staggering following with this ideology, and got to the point that they sort of existed as vagabonds until they made their way out to California. The entire time sort of living this nomadic lifestyle as they went across the country until 1996. In 1996, whenever the comet Halley-Bopp went by, the two believed that behind it was a spaceship that was supposed to take them into the afterlife, and the only way to catch it was if they were dead. They managed to convince 38 other members of the Heaven's Gate cult to commit suicide with them. They did this by eating a concoction of phenobarbital and applesauce, to which they all went and laid on their beds and waited for the end. This actually took place over the course of 3 days, in which one group would do the deed, to which the next group would then clean up, make preparations for them to do it, and so on and so forth. They all wore matching tracksuits with matching Nike shoes. One of the reasons for it being one of the group's mottos was just do it, and the Nike logo, you get it. They also all wore armbands that said Heaven's Gate Away Team, and each had $5.75 in their pocket. This is a reference to in the book Huckleberry Finn, whenever a character says all it takes is $5.75 to get a ride to heaven on the nearest comet. What's really weird is even after the Heaven's Gate cult, several of the members who were not a part of it later committed suicide themselves. Some attribute this to a sense of survivor skill, while others see it as a lack of purpose. But it's interesting the effect that this one couple had on so many people in such a personal way. Unknown bunkers is in reference to the fact that there are a ton of unknown bunkers that exist across the world, especially the US. Not only have random bunkers been found in the bases of abandoned buildings that have satanic or Latin text scribbled on them, but also think about it this way. There's a lot of companies that sell bunker supplies, or entirely made bunkers for crews to stay in. But how many bunkers do you actually know about? Which means they've got to be around here somewhere, and assuming all of them aren't just going to doomsday preppers, then what are some of them for? Which could possibly lead into the final theory of the entire iceberg, actual Illuminati. So a lot of people throw around the name Illuminati a lot as a joke, right? But what are they really? Well, it's believed the original foundations of the Illuminati come from the original foundations of the Freemasons. The Freemasons trace their origin all the way back to the original temple built in Israel under King Solomon, with the idea that they will always exist as a sort of unseen hand behind the scenes of world powers. Well, the Illuminati was officially made in 1776. However, due to several sort of traditional Christian beliefs at the time, they were made illegal almost everywhere, especially in France, which is where they originated. Their belief was very anti-God, with the idea that we ourselves should be the own deciders of our fate and should look to a higher power, something we don't truly understand, and instead people need people to rule over them. So even if they don't know we're doing it, we'll do that for them. The plan among members was that after they were outlawed, they would slip into hiding in a sort of secret society and simply continue to act from behind the scenes, with several believing that they are directly responsible for the French Revolution. Here's what's so interesting about them. We have no way of knowing the capacity to which they exist. If it's true and they are interconnected with the Freemasons, that means everyone who's a high-ranking Freemason could possibly be implicit with it. Or, if they died out and they didn't successfully join together, then there's nothing to worry about. However, the problem is, if they don't exist, or they exist at full capacity, there's no way for any of us to be able to tell the difference. The disappearance of them from the Earth could mean they're really, really bad, or really, really good at what they're doing. The real Illuminati, and the reason that it's proliferated so much in conspiracy theories, is because it's the very literal equivalent of watching a shark fin dive under the water. Did it go away, or is it still swimming where it's always been? And that is it for the religion and cult iceberg. I want to emphasize, especially with some of the bottom stuff, and how some of these were very kind of anti-human or anti-righteous in their presentation. This is a video to specifically discuss the worst of the worst as it's publicly known. If you want to see what humanity has done with beliefs and ideas and inspiration, just look around you. There are an infinite number of positive outcomes that have come from ideas of love and charity and giving that completely outweigh everything I just talked about. It's exactly like I talked about in the disturbing iceberg fig. Yeah, it's fun to look in the rabbit hole and see how deep it goes, but you gotta remember to take your head out, because in the grand scheme of things, the rabbit hole ain't that big. And as I've said before, yeah, the world can be a pretty bad place sometimes, but it can be a pretty cool place too. And part of that coolness is you all sticking around and watching this video, and I sincerely mean it. Thank you for watching. My social links, as well as the artist and editor social links, will be in the description below. So please, more than me, give them a shout out, talk to them, say hi or whatever, because they deserve it. My links to the subreddit, Twitter, sweatshirt, and Patreon, as well as the original image of this iceberg, will be in the description as well. I don't have the name of the guy who created this iceberg. I'll look for it as soon as this goes up, and before it goes up, to see if I can find it, but if I do, I'll put it in the description as well to give them credit. And as you can see next to me, these are all my beautiful top-tier patrons. I love them so much. And while I'm at it, thank you so much to everyone for watching. You all are the best. It means the world. Thank you for the absurd number of subscribers I'm up to now, which is beyond my comprehension and beyond what I deserve. Yeah, you mean the most. Thank you all. Thank you to all.
Airwick was inspired by the beautiful, natural fragrance of wildflowers to create our limited edition spring collection. So we're partnering with World Wildlife Fund.
The complete opposite of no kithing, with a whole lot of kithing in necromantic. This is about a couple who has an obsession with collecting body parts, which eventually culminates in a decomposing person. There's then things performed with said person, as well as other weird stuff in the movie, like bathing in blood, and they show a real rabbit dying, so that's gross, I guess. A whole lot of philia involving things of the necro sort, so, you know, real gross. Don't watch it unless you want to. I mean, I'm not your dad. You can watch whatever you want, unless you want me to be your dad. In which case, hi son. How are you today? How was school?
Tenno, the balance of power continues to shift. Navigation is marked with new
Bucko gets to the point that, like, reading these next entries in my notebook here, I'm just like, oh, I have to talk about that one, don't I? And then I get done with it and I go to the next one, I'm like, oh, I have to talk about that one, don't I? Melancholy der Engel, which I took German class, yeah, that's how it's pronounced, which translates to the Melancholy of Angels, is about two friends who are nearing the end of their life and decide to just find an old cabin and kidnap people and be gross about it. There's a lot of stuff here to do with, like, human fluids and other gross things. What is funny, reading about it, is that there is scenes of animal death throughout the movie, and specifically there's scenes involving pigs and one scene involving a cat. So whenever this movie got denied distribution in, I believe it was the US or the UK, they argued that the scene involving the cat was fake, although they had told people that it wasn't. So then whenever they were asked about the other animals, the filmmakers were like, no, those were real, but the cat wasn't. Like, why was that the one you felt the need to clarify on? Which I guess leads me to believe it was faked, because they did deny the other ones, but still, like, what? Where the Dead Go to Die is an animated anthology that looks like the cutscene from an early 2000s video game. After doing research into it, it's because the film's creator pretty much did every single process of the animation cycle, which is a big deal and should be commended, until you realize, like, what the content of the film is. Basically, the plot is it's a 3-part anthology film, with the connecting through line being this demonic Labrador that's telling people to do evil demon stuff. It's really gross because there's, like, things involving animals and, like, things involving a pregnant woman and other, like, really gross, over-the-top stuff, but it all looks like that really awful Ratatouille spin-off Ratatouille. So why it's really evil and you don't want to think about it, there's this part in your brain that's like, character move funny. It really does look like an old Silent Hill video game, and I mean that in the worst way. Juvenile Crime, also known as Schoolgirl in Cement, is about the real-world story of Junko Furuta. Probably pronouncing that wrong. One day while on the way home from school, Junko was kidnapped by 4 local high school boys who were in the Yakuza. They then kidnapped her, locked her in their parents' basement, and did completely unspeakable things to her over the course of 44 days. While not to go into too much detail, when she was eventually found, she had been hurt to the point that her brain had decreased in size from lack of nutrition and injury. Other details of the story become increasingly frustrating, like only 4 days into the torture cycle, the police actually visited the house and didn't look any further into the house, which may have saved Junko's life. Junko was actually found through an accidental confession in which the boys were interrogated over a different missing girl. They thought they were referring to Junko, and one of the boys gave away where they put the body, not even knowing that Junko had been missing, or not knowing that she was still missing for this time. Because of the boys' age involved, they were giving very light sentences. As a matter of fact, they're all out now, although 3 of the 4 have already been back to jail for some form of violent crime, which, yeah, imagine that. The judge said during the court proceedings that what had been done to her was so horrible that surely her soul is still wandering the earth, cursed and afraid. During the reading of what happened to her, people in the courtroom began to faint, and Junko's mother was put into an intensive care psychiatric facility. Also, reading this got really sad in some cases, especially near the end. It did get to me a bit whenever her classmates essentially read their eulogies after Faye's died, just realizing that this amount of people happened to someone who was 16 years old. It does get pretty hard. One of the more bright things about it is her future employer, or who would have been her future employer, officially gave her the job and then brought the parents to the uniform she was going to wear, and the school gave her a diploma to say that she was and things like that. That was really depressing. I need to pick it back up. Let's go back to the dad thing. You want to go fishing, boy? Alright, I'm better now. So there are 3 movies about this event involving Junko, the most popular of which being the film known as Cement, which from my understanding is, like, more respectful to the character. This movie, Juvenile Crime, is not that at all. It's just a long movie that shows in excessive detail what happened to her, and there's not really a point gleaned for it, or it's not done in any way to like bring sympathy to her. From all the reviews I read, it's just an exploitive movie of a real-world tragedy that happened to this young girl. Philosophy of a Knife is a film about Unit 731, which is a real-world unit that operated under Imperial Japan during World War II. While many are familiar with the atrocities committed by Germany during World War II, not many are that familiar with Japan's. Unit 731 specialized as a bioweapons facility in which they were testing the effects of certain biological factors and diseases on people. The way they did this was by kidnapping large groups of people or telling them they were going to work for, say, a lumber company or something related, and they were then used as human experiments. Most of them were used to test things such as the bubonic plague, which was actually then later tested on random cities and villages in China in order to see the effectiveness of it. One of these strains was so effective that it was attached to an airplane, which was then going to be used to attack San Francisco, according to records. However, 5 weeks before then, the war ended. The movie Philosophy of a Knife shows what some of these experiments were in gruesome detail. Some of these include killing people using a decompression chamber to test the body's resilience to pressure. Others are freezing limbs of people until they become completely hard all the way through, and then pouring boiling water on them to see the effects, as well as supposed real footage of the aftermath of some of these experiments, as well as the mass graves that were created. Also, I should mention that in the real world, several members of Unit 731 were granted amnesty by the United States in order to become part of the American Biological Weapons Program, much like how the Germans were with Operation Paperclip, so that's cool. We are now halfway done with the iceberg, so pat yourself on the back and get ready because it just gets worse. So now in Tier 5, since every tier is its own category, Tier 5 would be that of like depravity and extremism. Like if you take...
I think I found the man that I'm gonna spend the rest of my life with. Why aren't you jumping? Only thing is we haven't actually met in real life yet. Oh no. We're over. Crying cat, flag of Portugal? That's supposed to be another crying cat.
How I Met Your Father.
The Shopify multi-carrier shipping app helps you grow your online store by partnering with multiple shipping companies to reach more PIN codes in domestic.
Extremism? Like, if you take all the branches from where war originated and see French extremism as the root of American grindhouse and stuff like that, this would be what would happen if French extremism just kept going. So while a lot of these are films with a plot, they mostly just exist to be as proven as possible. Starting with our first one, Girl Hell 1999. This one's really weird plot-wise. It's about a couple of guys who, like, attack women a lot. And then there's weird elements in it, like family kissing, as well as like this weird subplot with a homeless woman who seems to be nice, and then the girl who is being attacked kills her for some reason. Honestly, compared to some of the stuff in Tier 4, it's not that bad, but it is probably the peak of like Japan weirdness, at least so far for the list. Ostermontaug is where it gets. Oh boy. So in researching this one, like, people were talking about clips and scenes from it, like, this isn't that bad. But then everyone kept referencing the end scene. Everyone's like, oh yeah, that end scene, that did it for me. That's one of the worst things I ever, blah, blah, blah. And I couldn't find any info for what it was, except for one message board, and I wish I had it. Basically, it's just further women violence in various ways, with things like needles and knives, which is always as well as with the other fluids, and yeah, gross. Ostermontaug is German for
The reaction is working on your relic.
Again, a lot of these don't have English translations in any regards, so you just haven't got to guess. But I will say the ending was probably the grossest thing I've ever seen done with the movie, so I guess that stands for something. The next title, women's flesh by Red Guts is from Japan, as you can imagine. The plot of this one, as Spooky Rice covered, seems to be mostly about a woman who her man left her, and to cope with it, she just starts mutilating herself in creative ways. Now, what's interesting about this kind of movie is the production company that made it, is at the end of the film they show trailers to other Varrock films, which gives us our first preview of something we're going to see a lot of in the later years, as they gave the trailer to something called Rare a Dead Person, which is random clips of a dead person. There's going to be more depravity like that later on, but right now we're still the doll of flesh is similar to the guinea pig, which I mentioned last year, although this one involves more gifting. The basic plot of it is a girl is hired to be on a remote film, and then they keep ramping up and getting her to do stuff she doesn't want to do, until it gets to the point that no one will want to do, and she's killed, and the guy she's with is killed, and it's a big bloodfest. The more creative part from this movie was a scene in which the tongue is being cut with various cutting objects. I think a lot of people view this one so hard because the way it's shot implies that it was really good, but it wasn't. There were actors, and it was a director who made it, and like a lot of the effects kind of give it away because they do look really dumb. But I guess just the idea of it is enough to make people think, oh, this is some crime that we've got to do something about. When no, it's just weird stuff. Mei-chan's daily life is based off of a manga by the same name. Basically, the plot of it is a girl discovers that she has regeneration abilities, so she can lose a limb and then regenerate it. So a rich client decides to start renting her out to other rich people so that they can do depraved things to her, and she'll miraculously recover from it. Now, people have said that they like the manga as it's some kind of like artistic look at horror and violence. However, whenever you take that from a manga to a live action version, it's just kid stuff. And all the reviewers said that a specific gruesome scene involving the eye and stuff like that is what elevates it to the level that it's held at, and that the effects are very well done. So, well done. The Taming of Rebecca is a KISS film from the 1970s. At one point, it was ruled by a government board that's apparently job was to review adult films for some reason, as being one of the world's most depraved examples of the adult film industry. The plot's just gross. It's your standard gross adult film plot. There are a few things that make it stand apart from your standard adult film, like mutilation or whatever. The most interesting part of the whole thing is that the director of the film was later arrested for shooting a man in an ice cream parlor, supposedly trying to rob an ice cream parlor. So, yeah, good for him, I guess. He didn't kill the guy, and then after he got out of jail, he went to college and became like a software engineer, which, okay. The Necrophiles is a film about a zombie that is brought alive by a satanic cult that goes around murdering and kiffing women. The entire thing is on YouTube for one, and looks like it was filmed on an iPhone. But I've got to say, it's the funniest thing on this entire list. Like, at one part in the film, they tried to conjure a demon, so they just tie a baby doll to a string and then fly it around the room chasing people, and the acting is hilarious, and it's all hilarious. I think that the creator of this iceberg legitimately put this on here just to make me feel better. Like, if anyone is this far down and getting depressed and, like, destroyed by everything that they're reading, this is an alleviation from it. Here, I'll play this clip. So, thank you, Nice Guy Phil, for making me feel a little bit more okay with this. The one thing I would say that's, like, gory, quote-unquote, about it is the blood effects do look pretty good. If I had to guess, they use, like, real animal stuff from a slaughterhouse to do it. So, I mean, it looks pretty good, but the plot's so absurd, and stuff around it's so absurd, and yeah. Eccentric Psycho Cinema is a 7-movie collection that is based around the concepts of girls being kidnapped and then bad things happening. There was a lot of, like, review boards that I pulled
for these videos because, again, I don't want to watch them where I can't watch them. And one of which called this the worst film series of all time. And I don't think that was in a quality way. I think it was in a psycho cinema way. It's your standard, like, torture flick where it's just so.
So we have a secret legacy, a birthright that's been kept from us.
Let me see them teeth. Baby, how you eat?
I used to carry the bill to the show and let people feel special.
The 23rd major title.
See, the way old hotel rooms work was there was a lock on the outside and a lock on the inside. That way, if someone was leaving or management wanted to lock the door, they'd use the outside lock, and if someone wanted to lock others out, they'd use the inside lock. So whenever she walked up to the door and saw that there was water, she assumed that he had left for the day, but upon opening it and seeing that it still said
Don't forget the reactant.
that means someone
To open that relic.
When she came back that day to return towels, the door was locked, to which a very deep, booming voice on the other side of the door says, "No, leave, we don't need towels." On top of that, the guest in the next room had said that over the time they would hear tons of voices in the room of men, women, swearing, cursing, that also as
That's it. You opened the relic. Finish your mission and we'll take you inside.
Bellhop goes to the door and after no response lights himself. He sees pristine condition.
The enemy is broken.
Walks
Well
over,
done.
puts the
Now
phone
get
back
to
in the
instruction.
and leaves, to which an hour later he gets another call from management that the phone doesn't look again. This time the first time, Bellhop finds a roller in the corner, stabbed multiple times with his head in his hands. Blood adorning the curtains, the walls, the floor, everything. Not only that, but there were straight marks on his wrist and ankles. After that, it got even weirder. The coroner's report had shown that the injuries had occurred several hours.
Another job well executed.
Only that there were straight marks on his wrist and ankles showing down. After that, it got even weirder. The coroner's report had shown that the injuries had occurred several hours before the body was found, meaning that he should have been bleeding out or been stabbed whenever the bellhop entered the room. Whenever the police investigated the room, they saw that Roland had no items, there was no clothes or any other personal effects. And as you can imagine, Roland Owen was an alias. They then found out that he had been staying for about a week at the hotel next door under a different name. And then, to top it all off, before he was going to be buried by the state, a check came in with a bouquet of flowers and all the money needed to pay for an actual funeral, along with the note that said love forever. I don't know what to make of any of that. That's your all's. I can't speculate besides the fact that it was, of course, a devil cult murder. I mean, like, go on, seal, devil, Lucifer, like, all makes sense to me. That's what the voices were, and he got stabbed to death by the devil. I don't see what the issue is. Malachi Logan disappeared on May 15th, 1988. She was 9 years old, and at the time was playing at a basketball court next to her apartment that was in Saluda, South Carolina. She was playing basketball with her friends before she got on a ride and home, which was only about 300 bicycle was in the parking lot of the apartments, indicating that either she made it there or whoever kidnapped her brought it there for some reason. The case was completely cold until October 1st of 1920. A deer hunter who was hunting off of South Carolina Highway found a skull on the ground, which was later tested and confirmed to be Guy's. However, this wasn't confirmed until DNA testing was made available in 1998, a whole decade after her disappearance took place. These are especially haunting as there seems to be no credence or explanation given to any of them. She simply disappeared and then her skull was found, and none of it makes any sense. The Buckskin Girl is one of the most famous Jane Doe cases. On April 24th of 1981, 3 boys in Troy, Ohio found a girl lying in a ditch. The reason for the name of the Buckskin Girl was that she was wrapped in a buckskin poncho. The cause of death was determined to be a strangulation as well as blunt force trauma to the head and neck. What's so wild about the case is the
This is hot. Angry.
It got to the point where they were analyzing the pollen samples on the inside of her sweater, as well as hair follicles to determine if she had any drug habits, and then using that chemical compound of the drug to determine what region it was made in. They pulled out all the stops, which eventually proved to be successful when in 2018 she was identified as Marcia King. The reason no one could identify her is because the body was found in Ohio and she was an Arkansas native. It's believed that she was a hitchhiker who was eventually picked up and killed by someone near her, and it is a sad statement that rather than finding out who the guilty party is, the success in this case is simply finding out who's killed.
People think unusual circumstances means complicated taxes. But for a TurboTax Live expert like me, it just makes things interesting. So,
The success in this case is simply finding out who was killed. We are now down starting in the deep end at Tier 5. Paula Jean Weldon left for a short day hike from college on December 1st, 1946. She was going to something called the Long Trail in North Bennington, Vermont. She packed no extra gear and gave no. Her disappearance is especially odd, considering as frequently as the trail has traveled, there's been no signs or evidence of her since. The only suspect named in the case was Omar Jack, who was mad at his girlfriend and was seen driving to the area that she was heavily for their missing information.
They're dropping reactors. Use it to crack the umbrella. Keep fighting. Look for more reactors. The relic has been opened. Finish your mission to find out what's inside. Rainier should have known better than to walk into the tower unprepared. Let's clean up their mess.
Whenever the head was found, the eyes were closed upon the eyelids in the stomach. It was otherwise
still hold.
Fourth killing in 1981. All of the killings occurred in couples day locations. Also, over the years, there were
Another successful mission. Find extraction.
does not mean it was associated. She then stormed off upset and seemed to disappear from campus. That was until 9 days later, pieces of her body began to be found in plastic bags around the campus. This occurred over the course of several days at 8 separate locations, where it was found that her body was cut into 2,000 pieces, with some of them being coated in oil. Eventually, all pieces were recovered from her, save for heart, liver, and spleen. And what's so absurd about this is a question of raisins. Like, who kidnapped her? Why haven't they struck again? Why were the pieces left back on the university campus? And what's the purpose of mutilating some of the body parts in that way if you're just going to bag them and bring them back to campus? Also, as soon as I typed this into Google and hit search, the first image I saw was a picture of all the body parts assembled back together. So, I know I always say, like, be careful when researching, but not for any, like, legal or reason like that or whatever, just for your own well-being, like it's just wanting
You know what they say. The road to good intentions be paved with hell.
Mission complete. Excellent work, General.
These occurred in London, England from 1964 to 65. While it's pretty well confirmed that he was responsible for at least 6 murders, there are 2 more that were speculated. The name Jack the Stripper was given as many believe this to be a Jack the Ripper copycat, and combined with the fact that his target was the same as the original Jack the Ripper, that target being prostitutes. Aside from several of the women who were potential targets given sketches, no other leeway was made in the case. That didn't stop them from naming 7,000 suspects.
Oh, it's fucking fire.
This fire left one firefighter dead as the building burned much more quickly than anticipated. It was determined that this pattern of fire matched that of which other fires that occurred in the Seattle region. Police eventually named the suspect the king of arsonists, as they didn't even know it was an arsonist until this one specific instance. The links they went to try to find out about this guy is insane. Like, for example, the fire department burned down an abandoned strip mall
keep being you,
dreaming that they believed the arsonist was using to see how fast the building would burn. They then took witnesses who were at other arson events and had them under hypnosis to see if they could remember the faces from the crowd. Supposedly, the Seattle arsonist just disappeared and was never caught, which makes it even weirder that all this effort was going into stalking him and he didn't even need to be stalked in the first place. The Ziegler furniture store murders occurred on Christmas Eve in 1975. Police arrived to the furniture store in Winter Garden, Florida, to see Tommy Ziegler shot, although alive, while his wife, mother, and father-in-law, and home intruder are dead. According to Tommy, what had happened is he came into his home, which was attached to the furniture store he owned, to see that his wife and in-laws were dead, and 3 men were in front of him who were being shot. Tommy then pulled his gun and fired, killing one of the 3 men, to which they fired back and the other 2 escaped. There were 5 guns found at the scene, with 30 rounds spent, which makes sense for Tommy's gunfight story. However, the police pinned Tommy for the murders. According to them, Tommy killed his wife and in-laws in order to receive life insurance, and then shot himself in order to look like he was the victim whenever the police arrived. During the court trial that followed, the prosecution got 2 men together who said that they were the 2 additional robbers who broke into the house that night, and that Tommy had hired them to kill his family and stage it to look like a robbery. However, they later recanted and changed details of their story, and a lot of the details I'm about to mention get kind of fishy. Like, for example, the prosecution pointed out that Tommy liked guns and had guns, so therefore he could have bought guns to give to the people that broke in, which, yeah, anyone could. And after he was found guilty and the jury gave him life in prison, the judge changed it to the death penalty. See, the judge and Tommy had bad history, as previously they had both testified on opposite sides of a separate court case. After the trial was over, Tommy's defense team was able to begin the prosecution's notes, where they found that the one bit of evidence that the prosecution had not used was a man who lived across from the furniture store who said that about 30 minutes before the shooting started, he saw a cop standing outside with a gun drawn and then walked into the house. The defense, saying that this may mean the police involved, were immediately shut up by the prosecution as well as the police department themselves. That, combined with the very harsh ruling on top of, like, the evidence didn't really make sense to give a man a death penalty to begin with, leads me to feel like there's some greater conspiracy going on here. Tommy Ziegler is still currently on death row, and in my opinion, didn't do it. We are now on to the second to last tier, with tier 6. Charles Morgan is an interesting one. He was a very successful escrow agent who lived supposedly the perfect nuclear family lifestyle. That was until March 22nd of 1977, when after dropping his kids off at school, he disappeared. 3 days later, he showed back up to his home in Tucson, Arizona, where he ran inside to his wife, unable to speak, with his wrist handcuffed and one handcuff around his ankles. He grabbed a pen and paper and told her that he had a hallucinogenic swabbed inside of his mouth that if he swallowed too much would go to his stomach and kill him. Over the next few days of him trying to throw up and get the hallucinogenic out, he explained to his wife that he was not an escrow agent and instead worked for the government on secret cases. He told his dad, who became worried about him after this, that if anything ever happens to him, he would leave him a letter explaining everything. When something did happen, the letter was